I've been a little bit sidetracked for the past few weeks. See, over the past about a month or so, I've been working on a few models from the Horus Heresy Saturnine box, but I still haven't decided if I'm turning traitor or staying loyal to the Emperor. In my defense, it's not just that simple. The legions I was deciding between were the Dark Angels and the Sons of Horus. I absolutely love the Dark Angels, especially their 30k appearance. Their unique knightly aesthetic and the heraldry patterns on their armor really capture the Arthurian Black Knight feeling. The problem is, I paint a lot of black. Between my 40k Dark Angels, painted in their Heresy colors, the Death Company for my Blood Angels, and my Age of Sigmar Soulblight Gravelords, everything always comes back to black. And really, it's just not as satisfying of a color to paint. But maybe it's not painting black that's my issue, maybe it's just my approach to it. Maybe I just need a challenge to get myself back and engaged with this army project. And while I'm at it, why don't I go ahead and kitbash some of the last few Saturnine units that I haven't gotten around to yet. Namely a Dreadwing Saturnine Centurion, and a whole squad of plasma-toting Dreadwing Saturnine Terminators. So, welcome to GoneHollowMinis, my name is Colt. Today we'll be kitbashing the Dreadwing and getting my Dark Angels back on track. Now, as we're getting into this, it's been a little bit since I got to talk about the lore of the Dark Angels, so I'm going to take the opportunity to talk about the Dreadwing. If you play Dark Angels in 40k, you might not be as familiar with this wing. Unlike the Raven Wing and the Death Wing, it didn't survive the end of the Heresy. The Dreadwing is a wing of the Hexagrammaton dedicated to the total and utter annihilation of the First Legion's enemies, in ways that other legions could only aspire to achieve. See, there's a reason the Dark Angels are the First Legion. They were the first legion to be raised to replace the Thunder Warriors. They're the oldest legion of Astartes. They've been at the Emperor's side since the beginning, and as such, they've seen the worst weaponry that the Imperium has to offer. The most destructive, the most cataclysmic, weapons that caused fires that could only be doused by the vacuum of space, that could not only level cities but leave them uninhabitable for generations. As the hosts of the Old Legion were replaced by the wings of the Hexagrammaton, many of these archaic and utterly destructive weapons were bestowed upon the burgeoning Dreadwing. We've already discussed in depth how the wings and orders of the First Legion operate, so feel free to check out that video for more information. But to quickly recap, legionaries with a knack for destructive warfare would likely be inducted into the Dreadwing. Legion Destroyers are among the most notable units to make up this wing of the Hexagrammaton. For a majority of their service, these legionaries would act in their regular units, as organized by the Principia Bellicosa. However, if a specific battle called for it, the presiding officer could cede control of the campaign to the highest ranking officer of the Dreadwing. This act was known as the Dreadwing Protocol. At this point, Marines of the Dreadwing would leave their line squads, forming up into formations as decreed by the presiding Dreadwing Master. This is where you get units like Dreadwing Interemptors, specialized destroyers used by the Dark Angels in such times as these. The insignia of the Dreadwing is an hourglass, each side a leering skull. They love this symbol, by the way. If I'm remembering Angels of Caliban correctly, Ferrith Redloss, a voted lieutenant of the Dreadwing, even has a dual-headed axe shaped like an hourglass, which is definitely something I'll need to kitbash at some point. Unlike some other wings of the Hexagrammaton, we actually have a system of rank for the Dreadwing. Most members of the Dreadwings are postulants or initiates. Postulants are uninducted prospective members of the Dreadwing. They aren't granted the heraldry or the rights of the wing quite yet, but once they've earned that honor, they'll become initiates. From there we have the title of Prefectus, which serves as a squad leader, lieutenants, which are analogous to the captains of most other Space Marine formations, and the voted lieutenant. The voted lieutenant is always appointed by the outgoing voted lieutenant, and is then voted on by the rest of the wing. A final unique rank to the Dreadwing is that of Eschaton. This is a revered and selective title, only granted to a member of the Dreadwing that has overseen the death of an entire species, race, or world. Now that we know a little bit more about the Dreadwing, how are we going to portray them on the tabletop? Well, I'm planning on turning my last 4 Saturnine Terminators into a Centurion and 3 Terminators with dual plasma bombards. The Centurion's rules can be found in the Forges of Saturn Tactica, the same sourcebook that we use for the Sons of Horus command squad. It's a shooting-focused character, so no axes or hammers unfortunately. The regular Terminators themselves will be a little bit more standard, but at least painted in the colors and heraldry of the Dreadwing. Between all the other conversions I've been doing, I've actually got enough plasma bombards left over to give each Terminator 2. Dark Angels do love their plasma after all. So let's get started with that Centurion. Here we're going to use a few leftover bits from a Saturnine Praetor, a couple printed elements, and of course some bits from the regular Saturnine kit. To start off, a quick note about the legs. Apologies if you've heard this before, but I've gotten a couple questions about it on some of my reels and shorts. Without modification, the legs of Saturnine Terminators are pretty limited. There's this little nub on the knee joint that locks into place on the inside of the greave. There are a few different positions, but by and large, the actual positions are fairly limited. We can fix this pretty easily by just trimming off that little nub on the knee. This gives us total range of motion to pose our Terminator how we want. It is a little trickier to hold in place during gluing, since there's no registration, but just go slow and you'll be fine. Now, I wanted to do some chest decoration anyway, but I noticed that the Aquila on this Terminator was pretty messed up. I don't know if that happened during shipping or sometime after I got this box, but hey, no worries, we'll just cover it up anyway. To start, I'm going to trim down the eagle portion of the Aquila. This will make it a bit easier to stick on his chest piece. I believe this piece is the Tacet off of a Deathwing Terminator, but you could realistically use pretty much any part here. To blend it in a little bit more, I'm going to use this piece of, rope? Cable? Something? I'm not sure, but I think it came from a Chaos Chariot kit. I'll snip this up and add portions to either side of this chest plate to make it look like that's how it's being held in place. This plate will be a really good place for either some freehand checkers or some smaller Dreadwing transfers. As for other decorations, I'll start by using some pauldron fronts from the Praetor kit, since these didn't really match the Sons of Horus. To make this guy look more like an officer, I'll also be using some printed Terminators and a loincloth. Links to the STLs that I use can be found in the link in the description, as well as a link to the printer that I used to print them if you want to check that out too. But one last detail I wanted to include was the Dreadwing Hourglass. I found an STL model that I liked, printed it with the Terminators, and stuck this on another length of cord from under his pauldron. Looking at this all together, it might have come out a little bit big, but I kinda like it, so I'm gonna go ahead and leave it. Now for the regular Centurions, most of the Dreadwing decoration can be done later with paint. Pretty much the only change was using these printed heads that I found online. It unfortunately looks like these specific files have been taken down since, but with a bit of looking, I'm sure you could probably find something similar. These were almost the right size, being scaled for Primaris, but it did take a bit of sanding and trimming around the back to get them to fit well. Then just some decoration and added greebly bits to make them feel a little bit more Dark Angels. Now for painting, and like I mentioned, this is where I kind of hit a wall when starting this project. I'm no stranger to painting black armor. Between my 40k Dark Angels, Death Company, and my Soulblight Gravelords, I spend a lot of time painting black. But the problem is that it's just not all that fun to paint. For me, at least. I think the recipes that I've tried look good, but it's just kind of boring as a painting experience. Like, compare it to the Sons of Horus that I've been working on. There's so much depth to the color, between the saturated sea green undertones to the ochre highlighted upper areas. You get to watch the color render and develop with each layer, and that's a really rewarding painting experience. Painting black armor with these recipes just didn't give me that same kind of satisfaction that I was looking for in this project. So, to get myself a little bit more interested and a little bit more engaged with this army, I'm going to give myself a challenge. I want to figure out a way to paint black armor without using a single bit of black or regular gray paint. Other than the primer, of course, but that gets covered up with the base coat anyway, so I don't think it counts. And speaking of, yeah, we're going to go ahead and start by priming black. This obviously sets things up to be nice and dark in our recesses. I'm using Pro Acryl Airbrush Primer, but you can use whatever you're comfortable with. But with our primer on, we can talk paint. The secret formula to this is in these three paints: Pro Acryl Mahogany, Black Blue, and Bright Pale Green. These will give us the whole range of shadows, base color, and highlights. So let's get started with the base coat. The ratio for this step is 2 parts Black Blue to 3 parts Mahogany. This mixes to make a really dark gray that still has a hint of color to it. I apply this over the whole model, base coating everything evenly so that there's no actual black primer showing. To shade, instead of using black, I'll instead add a little bit more mahogany, just a drop or two. This not only darkens our base coat mix, but also adds a bit more warmth to our shadows and recesses. I apply this with an airbrush into my darkest shadows, making sure to leave the base color showing most prevalently, although you could absolutely do this with hand brushes and glazing as well. I just did this to speed up the process a little bit. From there, we can start on our highlights. And for that, I'm going to switch back to brush painting. First, I can re-establish my base tone wherever my shadows got a little bit carried away. This is just using that same base coat 2 to 3 mix. Next, once we start actually building our layers, we can start pushing our brightness and contrast. Starting with that base coat mix of 3 to 2 mahogany and black blue, I'm going to add a tiny bit of bright pale green. Like seriously, it doesn't take much at all. Just about a brushful into a corner of my base color puddle. This will brighten our highlight mix while keeping the color cooler than our base color and shadow tones. I apply this with scratchy, textured motions to build up some weathering on our model while also building highlights. From there, it's just a matter of working in a tiny bit more bright pale green with each layer, slowly building up my highlights and scratches, trying not to get too carried away. I don't want this to read as blue on the tabletop after all. Now at this point, you're probably noticing that this paint job looks pretty rough, and yes it does. Until now, I've used mostly sponging to cheat my weathering and my grit texture. And since this is only the second Space Marine that I've tried this recipe on, I'm still figuring things out. But honestly, that's part of why I'm having fun with Dark Angels again. New recipes and techniques are like a puzzle to me, so having a reason to really engage with this paint scheme is exactly what I was missing. Sure, it's a little rough now, but as I work on the ratios of this recipe and figure out the techniques I need to use to make the most of it, it'll only get better. And also, just to mention, it does look a little bit blue in the studio lighting, but on the tabletop, where there's not a massive bright white light shining directly at it, it all kind of pulls together into this really interesting, very matte black. To me, anyway. I'm sure I'll still get a comment telling me that it looks more like a Night Lord. But now that we've got our black armor finished up, we can go ahead and move on to the heraldry. Other than the actual Dreadwing symbol, we haven't gotten much official information on what the Dreadwing uses as heraldry. We have seen these official Saturnine Terminators with the red checkers on their pauldrons though, so we might as well start there. I am usually better at this. I don't know what happened here, but let's just keep rolling. This is just Wordbearer's red as a base, highlighted with a bit of Mephiston red. Pretty simple, and will give us a great background for some Dreadwing transfers. But after a bit more time cleaning up some of those details, I was left with this. While I still have some learning to do with this color scheme before I paint up my Centurion, I'm still really happy with where this recipe is at right now. I think it looks great on the tabletop, and most importantly, having a new puzzle to solve is really fun. It completely drew me back into painting black armor, with a brand new set of challenges and techniques to refine. I'll absolutely keep working on this recipe as we do more Dark Angels, and I can't wait to see what this army will look like as I paint more and more of it. And of course, we can't forget about the Centurion. Like I said, I want a bit more practice before I paint this guy up, but I really like this Kitbash. I think it's simple, since Centurions are far less fancy than Praetors, but still pretty effective. I'm glad to get some more use out of those leftover Praetor bits, and I always love adding a bit more medieval flair to my Marines. Thank you all so much for watching this episode. If you're hungry for more 1st Legion content, why not go ahead and check out some of the other videos that I've already done on the Dark Angels, and stick around for more coming soon. If you enjoyed this video though, why not leave a comment to give me some feedback, and drop a like while you're down there. I know it's a cliche, but hitting all those YouTube buttons really does help us channels out. Subscribe and turn on notifications to not miss another Dark Angels or Kitbashing video, and until we meet again friends, be safe, be kind, and don't you dare go hollow.